North Carolina has a system that ranks every county by economic distress. 40 are distressed, 40 are middle, 20 are healthy. When a county climbs a tier, it sounds like good news. But the tiers do not measure whether a county is getting better, only whether it is getting better than the others. So when Hurricane Helene wrecked the western mountains, eastern counties got bumped up the ladder without a single thing improving on the ground. The state's own tool for spotting decline is structurally incapable of registering decline that is universal. The map shifted. Counties changed color. The official counter for things that actually improved on the ground was 0. That's the story of North Carolina right now, a state with one of the strongest growth narratives in the country, hiding a quiet collapse inside its own measurement system. To understand what the map is hiding, we have to look at the state the map keeps insisting does not exist. The boom that isn't a lie. Start with what the state proudly tells you about itself, because the boom narrative has to feel real before the contradiction can land. North Carolina has been one of the fastest growing states in America for over a decade. Charlotte is the second largest financial hub in the country after New York. Bank of America's headquarters dominates the skyline. Truist's new towers, glass and steel, keep going up every year. The Research Triangle, Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill runs on top universities' biotech corridors and a cluster of pharmaceutical research and development campuses that pull in PhDs from every continent. Apple committed $1 billion to a new campus there. Google has operations on the ground. Toyota picked North Carolina for an EV battery plant. Wolfspeed chose North Carolina for semiconductors. Pick almost any tech-forward Fortune 500 company that announced a major Southeastern investment in the past 5 years, and there is a real chance the press release ends with the same 3 words, North Carolina. Top 5 business climate, top 10 for population growth. The headlines practically write themselves. This is not spin. The boom isn't fake, so the question isn't whether North Carolina is growing. The question is how a state with this much growth still has neighborhoods where 3 out of every 4 children live in poverty. And to find those neighborhoods, you do not have to drive far at all. About 2 hours. A place called the Rot Belt. Drive 2 hours east of Raleigh and you are not in a suburb of the boom. You are in a different state entirely. Parkton-Robeson County. Population around 435. About a quarter of residents live below the poverty line. Roughly 75% of the children, 3 out of every 4, are below the line too. Houses sit listed on the market for under $25,000, not as foreclosure flips. As listed market value advertised in the window, a single-family home for the price of a used pickup truck. The fire department is volunteer because the town can't fund a paid one. There are months at a time when there is no on-duty police officer in town because Parkton can't recruit or pay for one of those either. Walk the streets and you see boarded-up homes next to homes that are still occupied, overgrown lots where roofs used to be, empty storefronts with the lettering still half attached, peeling off in long strips. Locals describe what's happening as decaying right before our eyes, and they say it the way you say something you have already said too many times. Parkton isn't an outlier. It is part of a band of counties, the eastern coastal plain, the northeastern tier counties like Halifax and Northampton that locals have started calling the ROT belt. Same state, same legislature, same tax code as Charlotte and the Triangle. But it might as well be on a different continent. About 6% of all North Carolinians now live in officially distressed communities. That's roughly 600,000 people, the population of a mid-sized American city, scattered across small towns inside the boom's blind spot. And here's the disorienting part. If it really is this bad in Parkton, and it is, why doesn't the state's own distress ranking flag it as the worst of the worst? Why doesn't the official map scream what the streets so obviously show? The answer is the engine of this entire video, because the ranking was never built to flag what's happening in Parkton. It was built to do something else entirely. The quota that hides the crisis. This is the part where the system itself stops being a measurement and starts being a magic trick. North Carolina's economic distress system was created decades ago to direct state aid toward the counties that needed it most. Sound idea? Reasonable goal. Everyone agreed at the time. But here is how the math actually works. The system is locked into fixed quotas. Every single year, regardless of what is happening on the ground, exactly 40 counties get labeled Tier 1, the most distressed. Exactly 40 get labeled Tier 2. Exactly 20 get labeled Tier 3, the healthiest. Always 40, always 40, always 20. Think about what that quota does. If every single county in the state got dramatically poorer at the same rate next year, the rankings would not change at all. 40 would still be Tier 1. 40 would still be Tier 2. The system is structurally incapable of telling you that everyone is sinking. It can only tell you who's sinking faster, and it gets worse. About 20 counties concentrated in eastern North Carolina have been stuck in the bottom tier since the system was created. 3 decades of persistent poverty status. That means over 20% of residents have been below the federal poverty line for 30 years or more. The ranking has nowhere lower to demote them. They are already at the floor. Then Hurricane Helene hit. Western counties, the mountains, Asheville's outer ring, places that had been doing relatively well were destroyed. Their numbers cratered overnight. They had to be moved into Tier 1. But Tier 1 is capped at 40. Someone had to come out. The counties that got bumped up the ladder were not ones that improved. They were eastern counties, Halifax, Northampton, others, that had been just barely clinging to the bottom of Tier 1, and that suddenly looked less distressed only because they were now being compared to a flooded-out mountain town. Some of them lost grant eligibility because of it. Their actual economies did not move an inch. The math just rearranged who was officially poor. This is the engine. North Carolina is not quietly falling apart despite the metrics. It is quietly falling apart because of them. The state's own measurement system is the camouflage. But surely the budget process catches it, right? The legislature looks at the numbers, allocates aid, course corrects. That is how state government is supposed to work. Except North Carolina has not passed a state budget in 942 days. 942 days with no budget, nearly 3 years. As of early 2026, most people in North Carolina do not realize this because nothing visibly broke. For most states, this would trigger a shutdown. Schools would close, services would freeze, employees would go unpaid, pressure builds, and lawmakers are forced to compromise. North Carolina's laws do not work that way. The state can keep spending at existing funding levels indefinitely with no new budget at all, so the pressure never builds. The deadline never comes. The stalemate just sits there, getting older week after week. The reason the impasse will not break is almost stupidly mundane. House Republicans want one pace of tax cuts. Senate Republicans want a faster pace. Both sides agree on the direction, they just cannot agree on the speed. That is it. That is the disagreement holding 3 years of state planning hostage. And in the meantime, there is no new funding plan for the rural hospitals that have been closing one by one across the eastern half of the state. No multi-year infrastructure commitments, no expanded Medicaid implementation funding, no fresh allocation for rural broadband and childcare, which every statewide focus group has identified as the single biggest barrier to people accessing the boom state jobs everyone keeps talking about. The places that depend most on long-term, multi-year state planning, rural counties, distressed school districts, the Rot Belt, are precisely the places that get hurt when the planning machine freezes. Charlotte and Raleigh do not need the state legislature to function. They have their own tax bases, their own corporate investment, their own gravity. The Rot Belt does not have any of that. So Gridlock is not neutral. It is a redistribution mechanism. It pushes the boom further into the boom and leaves the rot to rot. The state could survive this stalemate if it had a real cushion. It does not. 53 days from empty. North Carolina holds approximately 53 days of state spending in its rainy day fund. The national median is roughly 92 days. North Carolina is not last, but it is well into the bottom half on fiscal preparedness, and fiscal preparedness only matters when something goes wrong. Then something went wrong. Hurricane Helene came in from the Gulf in September 2024. It broke north and unloaded on western North Carolina with a violence the region had not seen in living memory. Asheville, the cultural capital of the Western Mountains, was cut off. Mountain towns were wiped out completely. Roads buckled and slid down hillsides. Bridges that had stood for a century washed out in a single afternoon. Power was down for weeks in some counties. Entire communities were reachable only by helicopter for days at a time. And the early death toll climbed every morning as crews finally cleared roads to towns nobody had heard from. Federal aid arrived eventually, but the immediate response had to come out of those state reserves. The multi-year recovery, rebuilding water systems, rebuilding rural hospitals, rebuilding transportation infrastructure across an entire mountain region needs the state budget that does not exist. Helene did not just expose the cushion. It triggered the tier shuffle we already talked about, which means the same disaster that scrambled North Carolina's fiscal capacity also scrambled the system that is supposed to identify which counties need help. One storm, two simultaneous failures, and that is just one storm. North Carolina has a coastline, it has eastern floodplains, it has the Outer Banks where the geography itself is shifting. The next Helene scale event is not a question of if, it is a question of when. The people who live inside this measurement gap are not waiting for an abstract future crisis. They are paying for it right now in things that do not make headlines. But the headlines don't count. Life expectancy in Robeson County, where Parkton sits, is approximately 73 years. Life expectancy in Wake County, where Raleigh sits, is approximately 81 years. That is an 8-year gap inside a single state. 8 years of life lost, depending entirely on which side of the invisible line you happen to be born on. That is not a quirk of demographics. That is what disinvestment looks like when you measure it in human time. Fewer doctors, longer drives to the nearest hospital, less mental health capacity, less preventive care. A population aging out faster because the systems are not there to keep them alive longer. When statewide focus groups for North Carolina's pandemic recovery plan asked residents what was actually holding them back, the number one answer was not jobs. It was housing. Affordable housing topped jobs as the perceived barrier to stability, even in a state where the headline metric for years has been, "We have the jobs." Broadband access remains patchy across rural North Carolina. Childcare is chronically underfunded. Reliable transportation is a daily problem in counties where the nearest grocery store can be 30 minutes away and there is no public transit at all. These are not separate problems. They are the same problem with different names. The Carolina Comeback Rankings do not measure any of them. The rankings measure aggregates. They blend the triangle's life expectancy with Robeson's. They blend Charlotte's broadband penetration with Halifax's. They blend the wages of a Bank of America analyst with the wages of a volunteer firefighter and call the result a state-level success. Statistically, the state is winning. Materially, half of it is not. But couldn't North Carolina just rewrite the system, reform the tier formula, address the housing gap directly? It seems obvious, so why doesn't it happen? Here's why. Why nobody will fix it. There are 3 reasons the math stays broken, and once you see them, you understand this is not a bug. It is the design. First, reforming the tier quota means redistributing aid. Some counties win, some counties lose. In the legislature already gridlocked over the speed of tax cuts, you cannot get a coalition to vote to take grant money away from this county and give it to that one. The political coalition just does not exist. Redistribution is politically toxic. Second, persistent poverty counties, the ones that have been stuck below 20% for 3 decades, are concentrated in majority Black northeastern districts. After the 2020 redistricting cycle, the political weight of those counties was further diluted by maps that critics describe as gerrymandered to entrench one-party control. The people most disadvantaged by the measurement system are also the people least empowered to change it. Gerrymandered maps help keep things that way. Third, the Carolina comeback narrative is politically valuable to whoever is in office. Top 5 business climate rankings. Top 10 growth rankings. Apple, Google, Toyota. Those investments are real wins, and real politicians want credit for them. Admitting that the state's own ranking system papers over a permanent crisis means undermining the brand that is pulling the boom in. The system is stable, not by accident, not by oversight, by design. The quietly in, quietly falling apart is not a failure of the state to notice what is happening. It is the state choosing not to look. The map that conceals a state. Pull back up to the tier map from the cold open. Same colors, same county lines, same picture you saw 15 minutes ago. But now you read it differently. It is not a snapshot of North Carolina. It is a snapshot of North Carolina's story about itself. The Carolina comeback is not a lie. Charlotte really is booming. The Triangle really is one of the country's strongest tech and biotech corridors. Apple really did pick North Carolina, and Toyota and Wolfspeed and the rest. The press releases are accurate. It is a half-truth that depends on the other half being invisible. North Carolina is not quietly falling apart despite being a boom state. It is quietly falling apart because being a boom state, at least on the rankings and in the press releases, requires keeping certain places out of the frame. The map does not measure North Carolina. It conceals it. And as long as it does, the boom keeps booming, the rot keeps rotting, and the line between the two keeps being drawn by people who never have to live on the wrong side of it. If you want more breakdowns of how geography and policy quietly shape the country, check out one of the videos on screen now. And subscribe so the next one finds you.